welcome. I'm Juliet Wolf-Robin, National Executive Director of American Photographic Artists. I'm going to have to keep letting people into the room here, so hold on a second. APA is a not-for-profit trade association of professional photographers, and the photographers mainly work in advertising, editorial, commercial, and entertainment sectors. We are run by photographers and industry professionals who volunteer their time to improve the industry. If you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join. We have 5 levels of membership, so there's something for everybody. Find a plan that works for you and please participate, join us. We have discounts for members that include rental equipment at Sammy's, subscriptions at Agency Access, Photo Shelter, BlinkBid, lights at Light and Motion discount. If you need a new computer from Apple, you can get a discount. So there's a lot of benefits of being a member. If you're a pro or leader member, you can be in the source book and get a free page, which the submissions are going on now. So just a reminder, if you are a pro or leader member, now is the time to submit your page for the next edition. We have a ton of events going on, so be sure to look at the events page on apanational.org. We have 3 events going on tonight, so after this one, you can hop on one of the other ones and then watch the 3rd one as a recording later. So there's a lot of things happening. They're run by chapters across the country. They're run by photographers who are volunteering their time. It's really important organizations, so please support us, attend our events, and participate as you can. APA San Diego has a competition going on right now called Untitled. And we have Anna Alexander, who's the director of photography at Wired, and a creative director named Mark Gallo, who are going to be judging that competition. It's only $10 to enter if you're an APA member. And there is a percentage of the proceeds that's going to a youth initiative called Outside the Lens, where they use cameras to help young people. So I encourage you to enter that contest. Really check out apanational.org and you'll see all the things that we have going on. We're a better community because you're participating in it, because the people who are here today are participating in it. Tonight's event has been put together by Darcie Adler. I really want to thank her. She's the one who reached out to everybody, who came up with the importance of doing this event. She's been a stylist and a set designer. She's an art director. If you live in Atlanta, you know her because she's got the agency, The Spin Style. They represent stylists for props, wardrobes, foods. They have set builders, hair and makeup artists, and more. It's a full creative styling agency. So check that out. They are based there, but she works globally. So somebody you really want to get to know, check out her website and follow her on social. Remember, everybody who's here today is also on LinkedIn. So you'll want to connect with everybody to be part of their network and see what other initiatives they're doing. Darcie also hosted one of these that we had about 6 months ago, which was a panel to talk about being on set during COVID. And unfortunately, some of the information is still relevant today. We would have hoped that we didn't need to know it anymore. But if you are interested, all that one is on American Photographic Artists YouTube channel, as well as a lot of our other past presentations. So take a look at that and you'll see Darcie's panel discussion there. We also have tonight Ken Schneiderman, who's an American photographer noted for his portrait and entertainment work, noted for his shooting soulful portraits for public awareness campaigns, portraits for editorial outlets, street photography in Japan, key art for movie posters. He's really known as a seasoned professional and he's got a comfortable demeanor. He's somebody that we really appreciate being here today and helping with this panel. And so I'm going to pass it to Darcie. We are doing this as a meeting, so all of you are in the same room as us. We are going to focus primarily on the speakers who are here tonight and answers from them, but I know that there are also reps in the audience. There are photographers who might have questions during or later. If you have questions during the event, put it into the chat area, and we will see if we can address it while the Q&A is going on. And if not, then afterwards, we're going to open it to everybody. So welcome. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Darcie.
Hi, guys. How's everybody doing? I am so happy to have so many people here. We're at 87 participants right now. I think Juliet said we had 177 people actually register. So we're pretty blown away. We hope to see people keep trickling in, but I'm thrilled. I'm the crazy person who wanted to put everybody in the same room because I'm all about community. For those who know me in Atlanta, I love bringing all of us together and giving everybody an opportunity to feel like they're a part of the conversation. And as Juliet shared, we really want you guys to, if you've got questions, put those in the chat. Juliet's going to be looking at those, and we may even invite you to come in and ask that question yourself if you're comfortable with that. So we hope that you'll be open to that idea. So anyway, let me start by introducing our prestigious panel here. I'm so happy. I think this is why everybody's here, because we've got some incredible reps here today. I'm going to start with Andrea Stern. Andrea Stern is the founder of Stern Rep, an LA-based boutique agency representing a group of passionate and talented commercial photographers in the product, automotive, and lifestyle industries, among others. She's also the founder of Ask Stern Rep, which is a free resource forum for photographers and entrepreneurs. She has a new website that is super cool. You guys have to check it out. It's asksternrep.com. I think she's done a ton of research and answering people's questions over time. And I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, I think you can kind of go in and like put keywords in to see if you've got an answer that will come up for you. So it's a really cool resource. Yeah. Incredible resource. I also want to introduce Candace Gelman. Candace Gelman follows her heart. For the last 3 decades, she has made it her mission to inspire the artists who are drawn to her to trust in their abilities and to follow their dreams. As founder and director of Candace Gelman and Associates, an agency that represents some of the most prolific image makers of our time, Candace builds bridges from art to commerce, seen through a lens of endless possibilities. Welcome, Candace.
And I'd like to introduce Matt Nycz. Matt Nycz is the owner, lead artist, rep, and executive producer at Bright Productions, a bi-coastal agency that reps photographers, digital artists, and directors. After a short stint in television production, Matt had the fortune of starting his career off as a photo assistant for acclaimed photographer Stephen Wilkes. And this led him to freelancing some other photographers. And that's where I met Matt, was as a photo assistant in New York City many years ago. And the one job in the industry he never imagined doing was repping. And he became a rep several years ago and started Bright Productions in 2006 with Vincent Dixon as the first photographer on his roster. He's proud to say that 15 years later, they are still working together.
Welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so let's get rolling. We have a lot to get through. I don't know if we're going to make it all the way through. I think most importantly, we really want to hear from our audience. So if we're in the middle of talking about something of interest to you, throw your question in the chat and let's see if we can bring you on. The opening question is, what brought you into this calling and what keeps you here? And I really want to hear from each of you on this. Andrea, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. It's funny because I was a photographer my whole life. I loved photography. And then I went to Brooks Photography School where I learned, oh my God, I don't want to be a photographer. It just didn't feel right. I couldn't do the technical stuff while talking to people. And I liked working with models and talent. And so I was really scared. I was age 30 and I was like, oh my God, what now? I learned of this thing called mind mapping. And I made this whole mind map of who I am and what I like to do. And sales were a big part of that. And I'm independent. And I showed it to the ASMP president in Seattle, the photographer. I said, please help me. I'm lost. This is me. And he looked at it and he said, oh, you're a rep. He just looked at it. I was like, oh, what's a rep? I had no idea. I actually became his rep and then started my own company, and it's a happily ever after story.
Oh, that is such a good story. I love it. We all need to do that mapping, that mind mapping.
Mind mapping.
Yeah, very cool.
Right.
Candace, how about you?
Well, I started out as a school teacher and taught my students to be passionate about who they are and what they wanted in life. And then I started working for a graphic design firm that actually hired me to be her agent, a rep for a design firm, which was unheard of at the time. So I was very persistent in having her hire me. So when I walked in and did a pay stub ad for Spuds McKenzie at 5 to 5, she said to me, "The type has changed. What do you think of this?" I said, "Well, it's a little tedious, but that's cool. I'll do it." She said, "That's not why I had you come in." And she pulls out this humongous portfolio and said, "I want you to take my work around and I want you to get me new business." So that's what I did, and brought in some great clients and went on photo shoots. And at that point, I decided I wanted to be a rep for photographers. So that was the beginning of this journey, which every day I still love. I love it every day. I love sharing the work and voice of all my talent, and it's a wonderful thing.
That's why you're still here and you're so good at it. It's great. How about you, Matt? What brought you into this calling and what keeps you here?
Well, I think Ken touched on a little bit of it. So I initially started off when I was in college, I worked summers working in TV commercial production, which was wonderful. And it kind of changed, like Andrea, I think I'd always been a photographer or had visual inclinations, but didn't quite see it as a career. But having spent a summer after my freshman year of college working in commercial production, all of a sudden I could see photography, film, and advertising all kind of how they all came together, and in a fun way and kind of an interesting way. So as I went through school, I switched my focus to photography and finance, two things that didn't quite necessarily go together at the time, but have probably suited me well in the long run. After school, I ended up working with Stephen Wilkes, he was at a Syracuse alum where I went, and they were looking for somebody right out of school. So I ended up spending about 2 or 3 years with him, and which was a fantastic experience because not only was I his assistant, I also was in his office exposed to the inner workings of a photographer's business. And interesting enough, Stephen's wife, Betty, was his executive producer, and she was the first person to say, "You should be a rep." And I was like, nah. And so after assisting I went on to freelance assist for a few more years. And as Ken meant, that's actually how we met and became good friends. And I worked for some great photographers, saw some great things, traveled a lot. Eventually I started doing production and was producing photo shoots. And it was, I guess, around 2006 that several of the photographers I was producing with were all saying like things are changing, and they were all kind of looking for something different in a rep. And a couple of them really encouraged me to try it, Vincent being one of them. And because the shift at the time it was becoming more production focused, and it was still sales. It was always sales, but it was definitely what people were asking for, and our production timelines were getting faster and faster. And when a photographer was out on location, it was impossible for them to answer questions. So that's how it started. And it was something I never saw myself doing, didn't consider myself, unlike, Andrea, who said like she filled out the survey or whatever it was, and it said, "You're a salesperson." I never saw myself at that at all, but the industry was changing. And then I saw a spot for what I did and what I could bring to the table, and gave it a go. And here we are 15 years later.
Phenomenal. Thank you, Matt. That kind of brings us to the next question, actually, was what actually falls under the responsibility of a rep in today's world? Because much like you were saying, things were changing 15 years ago. And as we all know, things have changed a lot in the last 15 years. So I think each of you may have a different answer for this, but what would you say falls under the responsibility of a rep in today's world?
Well, I think in starting off, like kind of going back for many of you who probably weren't in the industry at the time, there was a time that websites didn't exist. At least photographers' websites didn't exist. Reps' websites didn't exist. There were no like source websites. So it was your currency as a photographer or as a rep were portfolios. The flip side of that was, in terms of sales, the three of us could go into an agency, and if you got an appointment with an art buyer and you went in with a good book, or hopefully a couple, they would have projects on their desk that a creative director here already handed to them and said, I'm looking for photographers to do this work. And they would simply tell us, go see these 4 art directors, tell them I sent you for this job. And you'd walk over and you bring the book and sit down and talk about it. And it was more logical for sure. And you had a captive audience. And also at that time, art directors and creative directors didn't have the ability, other than probably Lurzer's archive, of seeing their competitors' work. So all of a sudden you're now also walking in a book with other competitors' work, and they're like digging through it. And really that all shifted once websites started. That role that we had, or even a photographer would have going into an agency, that shifted where it became more passive. They can go on a website and look and see what they want. Now we all know, and I know probably every single one of you probably has thousands of photographs. And one of our challenges, I would say, is reminding the clients we work with that don't just look at a photographer's website or my website. If you've got a project, reach out to us, because there's archives of stuff. And quite often, when I mention, we'll see a concept. One of my photographers has something that's so similar that might not be on their website because it's older or whatever, that we will, if we can put together that PDF, which is what we used to do. We used to curate portfolios. Somebody would call in, let's say Ogilvy in New York would call and say, we're calling portfolios in for IBM, or we're looking for industrial work. The 3 of us would have scrambled around, put together portfolios of any photographer who had that type of work, but it would have been all work curated towards what they were looking for and sent those books up. So you already put your photographers on a better platform of being seen for what they were. Now, if they don't ask, you might look at a photographer's website and they might have all that work there, but if it's not there, the art director skips right on by because they don't see it right off the bat. So it really is, I would say now is, for us as reps, the benefit is having those conversations and encouraging clients to reach out to us with those projects and asking us to send in PDFs, links, whatever, of that work, specifically what they're going for, because ultimately it does make their lives easier. It does help them pitch creative directors and art directors easier by showing them exactly what they were looking for. But that dynamic changed drastically and quickly. So it's something that we've been trying to, I think, for years now, still get a hold of and still try to keep that conversation going, where it used to be much more natural fit by being able to go in and show them something and present real work.
Yeah, so interesting. So true. Candace or Andrea, do you want to add to that or expand on what exactly a rep is today and what the responsibility of a rep is today?
Well, I'm happy to speak up because I think it's kind of different for everybody in their own personal approach, which to me is getting the word out and keeping relationships going. And there's a real fine line between checking in with people, being friendly, staying on top of mind, and not being annoying. So we always want to stay in touch and get people excited about what we're excited about and make them remember us. And, when I say us, I mean all of our talent, and know what they have to bring to the table. And sometimes they're so surprised and say, I didn't know they did that, or I've never seen that before. And it's really cool. It's great. It's just a love of what you do and who you do it with. I always say it's a marriage when I join with a talent. We're in this together and we have to do this together. Just because you have an agent doesn't mean you do nothing now. You know, it's definitely a marriage and everybody works hard. So that's my 2 cents.
Good 2 cents. Thank you. Andrea, would you like to add?
I could add, but everything that's been said here, I agree. I see us as their voice for the photographer. And also for a big part of it is the negotiation. We negotiate and hopefully get more money and take and protect. There's a lot of terms that photographers need in their bids, and it's the negotiation, the voice, and also to help them evolve and keep them growing as photographers. So it's really like the question I see it as, what don't we do?
And if I can actually add to that, one of the things I think I was mentioning earlier to both Andrea and Candace was a few years ago when I was discussing amongst a ton of photographer friends and a couple of my artists about the role, this exact question, the role of the rep. If you look at the entertainment industry, most actors have an agent, they have a manager, they have lawyers, and they have accountants. And each one of those people gets a percentage of their overall income. The agent is out there trying to get them work. The manager is advising them on what to take. The accountant, kind of helps control their books and their cash flow. And the lawyer reviews the contracts. We do all of that now. And that's another big shift. Of when I first started working, almost every photographer I worked with had a full-time employee, whether it was a studio manager or an assistant, who supported them and helped them with whether it be in their marketing, it be in their accounting, their billing. Very few, if any, now have an employee at all. And so those things have not disappeared. Those tasks need to be done. And from a professional point of view, it's a reflection of us as much as it is of the photographer. So what's ultimately trickled down is I guess a game of musical chairs of who's going to do it. Typically it's fallen, I think, more on reps, because we have we're seen as more of the business front. So we end up doing more of it. And I know that's been a discussion in terms of commissions when I've negotiated with some of the photographers where I'm signing on, of like what we do versus particularly photographers who've been in the industry a long time. 20 years ago, they had those people and now a lot of them don't. So that falls on, I need to employ somebody. I'm not the bookkeeper. And, I need to have a bookkeeper who's doing all the billing, and that there's a cost to that. So it's all those things need to happen. But I think the entertainment industry is a really good comparison of it, because an actor ultimately ends up paying like 40 or 50% of all of their income to all those people to get those things done. And a lot of that in this industry, because we are more overall mom and pop, it comes down to us. I mean, I can almost guarantee that both of you have sat there and reviewed POs and probably know legal language that you never thought you'd know, because none of us went to law school, but here we are negotiating with the agency lawyers because that's what it is. It's part of our job.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, having started in this industry in the early 90s. Everybody I worked with had a studio manager, and and there was a lot of responsibility there, and then the rep had a lot of responsibility, and I think everything's changed. I think people who work in agencies all have a lot more responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Photographers have a lot more responsibility. It's across the board. I think we're all doing a lot more and maybe getting paid less. So
yep, accurate.
Yep.
So our next question is, what photographers need to do to get their portfolios to a place where they could even be considered for representation? And this is very much kind of a golden question, but I also think it's sort of coupled with the idea of other than their portfolio, what tools do photographers today need to have in their wheelhouse that makes them attractive to be represented by an agent? And let me just throw one more thing into that. What role is social media playing today in terms of all that, portfolios and ability to represent, a photographer's ability to represent themselves with social media? Would anyone like to take that on?
I'll speak to the social media, which is huge, huge. I ideally like a talent that comes to me to have a lot of followers, people that are noticing them, that they're doing their own work and not just reaching out, trying to get an agent because they think that's the magic of making their career, because it's not. They have to do their own work and really work on their social and pretty much have their own clients already. Starting from scratch these days with nothing takes years. I used to say, I had a formula, it would take 2 years, then it became 3 years, then it even became longer. And now you just really have to, as a photographer, be doing your own work and, think about who you want to work with and try and develop your own voice, which separates you from everybody else, a strong voice.
Yeah, and I would add to that one of the things that I look at is over the time. So when I first started as a rep, I remember there was a very established rep who we were talking about, a photographer that we both knew. And he's like, oh my God, his work's amazing. He's like, but he's not sellable. And I was like, oh God, it's such a terrible thing to say. Like, how could you, like, it was like the guy's work was amazing. And now I really have a better understanding of what he meant, which is that the work itself is just one piece of it. You can be a tremendous artist, but if it doesn't apply to a commercial market, a rep's not going to help you, no matter how much they try. And believe me, I've been down, and I'm sure both of you have been down, where you've signed somebody whose work you totally believe in. There just ultimately doesn't end up being a market for it. From a photographer standpoint, for all of you guys, it's thinking about seeing your work and who you are and looking at the work you see on a commercial level. That's your goal, is to be a commercial photographer, is to look out at the work that's going on and say, well, what work do I like? Before you even know what agency, photographer, client even produced it, it's like, if you're caught up by something and it catches your attention, start making note of it, because those are the people you're going to want to reach out to. And for us, it's knowing that you're coming in with that mindset. It's not just that I'm a talented photographer who's done, fine artwork for a few years and has won a bunch of awards, because that can be a selling point, but also the rubber eventually needs to hit the road. And one of the things I think with social media over the last few years has been that we've had huge clients hire social media photographers who had a following, huge followings, and their work was good. It's not to take away from their skill. It's just that when it came time to take their one-off Instagram posts, which were rarely artful and beautiful, and a client that then said, we're going to pay you X to produce 40 of those, they weren't ready to do that. And that's some of where we come in, because we can look at those photographers and be like, all right, can you reproduce that? I had relayed to Darcie, I think last week, the story of a photographer I met with who we got on, and ultimately I wasn't the right rep for him. And we knew that. I think we met through a mutual friend, but he came in with a brilliant book of work. At the time, what I guess would have referred to as like hipster lifestyle. And the work was good. And he had produced a bound book, a published book, self-published, but it was, it had a Library of Congress number. It was good. And I looked at it and I said, and I had met with a bunch of people at this point who had that style of work. And I'd ask a lot of them the same question of, this is all great, but it was basically, you know, his college friends in a house partying, doing blow, you know, half dressed, and like, but they were great pictures, documentary, totally. What happens when somebody comes to ask you to reproduce this in a day for a brand? And he was the first person who actually had an answer. Not only did he have an answer, he produced a case study of something he had done for Adidas and how he had done it. And that was the difference, was he had already thought all that through and understood that he was going to be asked to deliver his personal work on a commercial level and replicate it in a way that professional standards, and have to produce it that's not just him hanging out with his friends. Where most of the people who I met with came in and were like, oh, I don't know. You know, I guess I get my friends together and we go hang out. And it's like, that's never going to work. So it's coming in with a mindset. If you're really out there looking for a rep, it's not just your work, but setting goals for yourself of what kind of work do you want to do? And what is it, you know, what kind of work inspires you? What are you seeing in the market that I mean, I think the question came up earlier, if not now, it will come up later about research. We're all constantly looking. We're all constantly watching what's out there and seeing the work. And just from not only like award ceremonies, but I'm constantly shooting billboards and subway posters and things and noting it and sending it off to my other reps and my photographers and saying, you know, just as noting for like work that's being done. When you see something you like, it's something that we all kind of are drawn to. And that's, I think it's more of an attitude of seeing it as a professional. This is something you want to do. It's not just about making great pictures. It's about delivering great pictures for a client. And for us, that becomes marketable. There's, I think 20 years ago, you could take somebody who is either less experienced or perhaps not the nicest person, but very creative, let's say, and you could market them and they would do very well. Those days are gone. You know, I think that clients no one has a tolerance for dealing with jerks anymore. There's no need for it. There's too many other talented people out there. And word gets around fast. So for us, that's toxic. So I'm very careful about the people I take on. It's very much reference based. Like for me, I definitely respond to emails when photographers send them reaching out to, I'm looking for representation. But one of the things that carries a lot of weight for me is if you can cite somebody I know and said, oh, I spoke to so-and-so and they said to reach out, because I know that already we have somebody in common and maybe you worked with them, where I can at least speak to them about who you are. Because personality and how you conduct yourself on set is a huge deal. And there is very little room for error anymore.
Thanks, Matt. That's great input. Candace or Andrea, do you want to add to that?
I could, but I mean, a lot was said and it's true across the board. I guess if I have to say, to get your portfolio to the level that you want a photographer, a good way to research is to look at reps, photographers, look at our sites and check out our photographers and go to the photographers' websites themselves. And you'll see they're strong, they're consistent. And that's how we get them hired. We make money. So you can use that as an example of where you need the level you need to get your book.
Only other thing I would add, and this is very brief on this, is if you are somebody coming out of a regional market, is to pick a niche. The hard thing from a rep is a national rep is not going to be able to, it's very difficult to market somebody who does a little bit of everything. So you might come to us, and this is true, I've signed people who've done a little bit of everything, but we will hone it down to saying you're going to do this. Because the reality is that we can't sell you for doing everything. So we'll find what we think is your best skill or your most marketable skill and probably zero you down to being that. And if you don't have that already, is to start thinking about that, what motivates you, what most inspires you. Because more often than not, that's what it is. You know, the rest of the stuff you might do to make money, you might be able to pay your bills, but what is it that if you were given a choice when you wake up in the morning and say, if you're going to go take a picture, you're going to give an assignment, what would you most want to do? That's probably the thing that we'll want to market you for, because that's what you're going to be drawn to do and inspired to do.
You
Have
must
any
find
of you,
I
Candace,
was
sorry,
just gonna
Candace.
say, have a consistent voice, find your own voice and make sure it's strong.
yeah,
have any of you, or do any of you take on any photographers for an a la carte project? Is that something that's more common now, or
Yes.
okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because people will reach out, who do you have that does this? So we all talk to many photographers, and we may not have that particular fit on our immediate roster, but we know of photographers that fit that. So we will recommend them. I'm sure everybody does the same thing. It's really servicing our clients too, because we can't recommend someone who's not right that's on a roster, but it's great to be able to recommend somebody that you know is perfect. And on the other end, they'll be all of them will be very grateful for it.
And to kind of book on it and actually add on to what I think something Andrea said earlier, which is that through the negotiation aspect and from an agency client who has a photographer that you've never worked with before, it's sort of like the mafia. They want someone to vouch for them. They want somebody to say like, okay, I know this person and don't worry, I'm going to be in the middle, so that because they can hire a photographer who might be great and who either might not understand the financial aspect of it, might ask for a lot too much, too little, or also might be overwhelmed by production and can't. So they want somebody they can talk to that isn't, if they have to have a criticism or if they need to vent or need a problem solved, they want somebody in between. So I've had situations where I've had agency clients I've worked with who will call and say like, I have a photographer that my art director found out of Europe who doesn't have a rep in the US, and I need somebody to be there in between. And could you do it? And, so it's always yes. And I'll work with that person, because they simply just don't want to be in the position of like throwing all their eggs in that basket of this European photographer they've never met, never worked with before. They want somebody they know and trust to kind of just manage the communications, manage the project, and make sure things go as expected.
I actually do a lot of this. I call it temp repping. It's on my website and Ask Stern Rep website, because it helps me as well. I'm meeting new photographers. That's how I met my food photographer, Vinny. I was temp repping with him. They call me when they're bidding on a job. And it's fantastic. Hopefully I can take care of them, protect them, get them more money. And also it helps me keep my fingers on the pulse of the industry. I know more about what's going on in all parts of the country. And even I'm learning new things like about influencers. I've been helping a photographer, she's an influencer. It's just educating myself. So it's been wonderful. And I do it a lot. Yeah. That's my cat.
So Darcie, we have an audience question from an APA member here in Atlanta, Brittany Wages, a friend and a colleague. And is she here? And is she I guess what I want to ask. Okay.
Brittany, can you raise your hand so Juliet can find you quickly? We've got a big group here. I'm hoping that will help bring you forward. Any luck? We need a search. Oh, you do. There is a search box at the top of the participants. Do you see that, Juliet?
Oh.
Oh, hey.
Hey.
Oh, hi. This is Brittany Wages.
Hey. So my question is actually kind of the other side of what you guys were just talking about, because I had heard of the temporary rep option from watching a lot of Andrea, your other chats and stuff. And I've kind of come into that situation a couple times where I've been asked for a bid and wondered if it's worth it. How do I kind of evaluate, like, is this something that I either Like, do I feel like they even have the time to like then go to a rep and wait on that? Or how do I kind of judge if there might be a budget that justifies like bringing someone in to negotiate for me?
That, and I would say that is one of the bigger questions, is kind of getting the sense of who the client is, because there are times when, as Andrea pointed out, that our role could be stepping in and we can help you get much more money than you would have thought you would have gotten out of a client. And then there are times with a local client or even regional clients, national clients, where the second they hear the word agent, they're like, whoa, they just assume you're too expensive. They actually will cut you out of a bid. You've got to use your instincts, I would say, overall, to try to get you. Part of that is just having an initial conversation would be my recommendation, and is with the client. Often they won't want to share a budget, but you can kind of suss out what they've got going on by asking about the needs of the shoot and what they're looking for. And ultimately, yes, usage and things that will play into it. These days, a lot of clients are definitely trending towards, they want to start with unlimited use, unlimited time, because it's not a model they're used to dealing with. So that doesn't necessarily give you all the cards, but if it's a large company, I would say then it definitely justifies thinking, well, maybe if I get a rep involved, it takes some of the burden off of you too. Because I would say from a photographer's point of view, ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to walk on set and be able to do your job and feel like you've done it without having to have a big fight or any bad will with a client. And that's sort of our job. We get to be bad cop and protect our photographers, protect our artists from having those negotiations around, even sometimes it comes out of small petty things, travel fees and things where, that's our role, but you might feel really important that your travel fee should be $1,500 and they want to pay $1,000. And if you sit there and make that fight for a day and a half, by the time you walk on set, everyone's kind of like, ugh, both you and them. So that's where it's useful. But if it's a client who's got a small budget, they could get scared off by the idea of bringing in a rep. And also from your business point of view, paying a percentage on a small fee doesn't really help you that much anyway. So I think the part of it is really trying to do due diligence up front in doing what you can to get a sense of what type of job it is, what scope they're working with, what they're expecting of you, how many photos you're expected to produce. In this day and age, it doesn't always kind of all align. They might have ridiculous expectations and still have no money, but usually when you get a sense of also their own experience level, it'll give you an idea of whether it's useful to bring one of us in.
I think it's pretty uncomfortable for a photographer to have to discuss money with clients too. I think your role is really to discuss the creative and sell yourself creatively, and the money is something separate that could make it turn in a different direction depending on how you handle it and what you know or what you don't know. So that's something to take into consideration as well. Usually a good agent can get you a lot more money that will make up for the percentage that you would be putting out, besides save you a lot of time and stress. It's very stressful from what I've heard from photographers in the past. So, but again, you have to weigh it out, what's right for you.
Andrea, do you have anything to add to those responses?
Yeah, I do, because sometimes I do this a lot, and photographers even know they already have the job and they want my help behind the scenes sometimes. Sometimes they don't want to bring a rep into it because, as Matt was saying, it's a little intimidating for some clients. But I am there to protect you and make your estimate right and clear, and the terms are exactly as you need them. And I'm doing it right now with a photographer, and the client came back. This has happened a couple of times. We send our estimate that I've approved, I've helped behind the scenes, and the client comes back with a I don't even know what they're calling it, not a sal, but their legal document with all these other terms. And they already approved the estimate with your terms that protect you. So you've got to be very careful. And this photographer, she needed my help just for that reason. And it, her choice, because she already had the job. So it depends.
And are they paying you to also assist with the treatment and with the production as well?
I would. This photographer it's not happening that way because she's already got the job. But yes, normally I'm on the creative call. I'm there. What do we need to talk about? What needs to be covered in the treatment? How do we bid this? What producer are you using? And I oversee the production.
And I think this goes back to the question of what is the role of a rep. And one of the things I've listed myself as is an executive producer. And in the film world, that's exactly what a lot of us would be, is that we bring the jobs come in, we oversee, kind of help parse out, organize who you're going to work with, what producer you're bidding with, help with the treatment. And you're kind of looking at the broad perspective. And at the same time, we're also the salesperson, which in the film world, they have separate salespeople, but due to the common sort of mom and pop nature of what we do or how it's been built out, we do a lot of that. But yes, I think that's precisely right. We're very much involved from A to B. And the difference being from 20 years ago was, and this is again how it works in the film industry, is the sales reps get the job in the door. From there, they hand it off to an executive producer. And if they get the job, they get paid. There's very little involvement from once it's passed off to an EP. Whereas it comes in the door, we help oversee it, we help with the treatments, we help kind of bring things. And, to the credit of you guys as photographers, mostly, I'm sure almost all of you are freelance individuals. And I shared a story earlier that there was a well-known New York photographer that I worked with who described it as everyone operates on their own independent islands. And even with being friends with other photographers, there's still a little bit of a weird competitive thing that goes on. So you're a little perhaps shy about sharing information. And so you kind of operate in this void. And we help kind of fill that void because we can pull experience from one project from another to say, oh, well, this happened with this, or we'll know the client and we can say, this is how they operate. It's difficult to be on your own. It's lonely. And even when you have photographers that you're friendly with, it's still kind of lonely and you have to really trust them to be able to bounce information off. But and the situations you might face might end up being totally unique, at least to yourself. But the broader view, the more experience somebody has, or the more we get to see, is definitely allows us to bring more to it. And particularly with things like contracts, I think we've reviewed, I can't speak for both of the other ladies, but I'm sure they have reviewed the PO or contract of most major agencies. And now, as I don't know if this is a situation you were dealing with, Andrea, it's like you get assigned approval from one client, but now there's a parent client who has these other demands they put in the last minute, and it's not what you agreed to. So we all of a sudden become.
Do each of you have lawyers that you're working with like regularly? Do reps like now? That's part of your job, is that you have an attorney that you speak to every week, or just occasionally?
We do.
Okay.
We have lawyers, I think, when we need to bring out the big guns. But the problem is lawyers cost money. Lawyers cost money for us, for you guys. And, unfortunately, we don't, unlike in the film industry where there's a production markup, where there's an overhead fee that you can pull from, none of us get that. So any decision to bring a lawyer in is usually communal with me and the photographer or the artist I'm working with. And to say like, listen, this is beyond, I've learned a lot about the law, like in terms of contract law and copyright law in the last 20 years, just simply by doing and existing and reading. And so I've gone toe to toe with agency lawyers now who assume I'm a lawyer based on these very narrow perspectives because I understand their language. But I didn't go to law school, and I'm sure neither of you guys did. But that's, those are the things we're now faced with dealing. The contracts every year get more and more complicated. And to be able to parse them through to make sure the photographer in the long run and us as reps and companies do not get screwed down the road. And the thing is, one lawyer I worked with, one of his pieces of advice was contracts and legal issues are never an issue until they are. And which basically means you can sign off on the PO, get it, because you're like, yeah, I got the job. All right. Until, for lack of a better way, shit hits the fan and all of a sudden everyone gets sued. And then all those little sentences become very important. And, that's something that I early on learned a little bit of the hard way and have now taken very seriously. And I will spend time going back and forth. And the thing is, what we as reps will be seen as, and I've been called this, difficult, because you have an art producer, let's say, especially if they're younger, I just want to give you a job. I just want to award you and give you money and get you shooting. It's like, yeah, that's great, but what happens if, and to that point, I usually just ask to be handed off to a lawyer because I don't want to deal with someone who, it's not their job to deal with the contracts anyway. But it is our job to make sure the photographers are protected as best we can. None of us are lawyers, but we've probably all become pretty accustomed to language and POs and legal language that deals with copyright protection, production protection, and the things that there's some usually red flags we all know to look for.
And Candace, you have a number of people who work for you. So does every contract then have to go to you to look at, or is everybody empowered to look at their own?
I pass it around. I definitely pass it around. My strength is not reading contracts. My strength is selling my talent. One thing that stands out to me though is work for hire. That really hits a bad spot with me when I see that written. And I always try and fight it and ask for exclusive, unlimited use, unlimited time, not for them to own copyright. And also I do encourage everybody to get their work, get copyright on all their work. Very important, because things get ripped off all the time. So
we should probably
yes,
quickly expand on copyright. And I don't want to, because I know we talked about earlier about we could spend a whole day on this. So when copywriting your work, every artist who shoots work, technically the copyright belongs to you. And then there's the registered copyright, which you have to register the images with the US Copyright Office. It costs you $35 to register it. Generally, we encourage our artists to do it after each and every project if they can. The big difference is that $35 fee of registering the copyright allows you to sue for damages if somebody rips your work off. If somebody takes your work off and it's not registered, the best you can do is basically get a cease and desist, and you might be able to force them to get payment for, especially if it's a client who's already paid you, to pay you what they would have paid you in the beginning. If you have registered and you can sue for damages, it's whatever a jury would award, and that can be a lot of money. And when I say a lot of money, I'm not talking about just thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars based on the number of copyright infringements. And unfortunately, it's something that is often lost. And again, it's one of those things where it usually only comes out when shit hits the fan and somebody's like, oh, this person stole my image. And you're like, well, did you register it? No. And I used to work with an attorney here in New York.
You can use it.
And he was very blunt, I would say. And he would usually yell at most of the photographers I would send his way for not knowing all what they should have done in the first place. So it is an important part of anything you shoot for, both for yourself, anything you're putting out publicly, and anything you shoot for a client. Consider doing it, because it really gives you a lot more legal protection down the road.
Plus, you always want to keep track of the length of time you're giving your rights for, and make sure it's not being used after that length of time, because It happens quite frequently, especially with clients that give the work to other people, to use that's part of their umbrella or what have you. And all of a sudden, a year later, they don't have usage and your work is being used. And that is infringement of copyright. And nobody should be using your work until they paid you for the job. Work should not be used until it's paid for.
And that includes, unless you've given them permission, that includes people using your work on Instagram.
Yeah.
No client, even if you tag a company, if you're shooting whatever it is, fitness, automobiles, like if you tag a client, they do not have the right to take your picture and post it on their own corporate feed. That has now been very much established. And there is no by you tagging them, there's no implied use or permission to use it.
Thank you. Very interesting. Andrea, is this the type of thing where Brittany's no longer up here, but I'm sure she's listening, that she could come to you and say, listen, I really could use a consultation on this, and can I get you to weigh in on, usage and some of these other a la carte things, and that would be something that you'd be willing to put together a sort of a package for her of how you would do that for her.
Absolutely. I've had photographers come to me and found very large companies using their images. So the hard part, really, the time consuming part for me at that point is I just have to find the right person at that company. That takes some time, some LinkedIn research. But once I can find the right person, we're going to make money. They don't know all the laws. They're scared. They usually didn't realize it. We don't own that. The usage is expired. So it's really an educational process. But photographers, you can always get help. If you see someone using your images, find a rep, ask them to help you with this.
That's fantastic. That's that is worth, I think, this entire evening right there. Thank you all. It's just super.
Well, and there's a lot of lawyers who are working in that field of dealing with copyright, and APA has lawyers who work in that. So if you have an issue and you have a question, we have a whole advocacy team that deals with it.
I will reiterate that the registering the copyright, and every lawyer that you talk to on your panel will say this, the ability for them to say the image is registered copyright carries way more weight. The second that gets sent to any corporate lawyer, it's because it becomes a federal case. It wakes every attorney up on the corporate side very quickly. I've been in situations where we've been dismissed, kind of talked down to, and then when that letter goes in, it's amazing how fast someone responds in a much different tone. So.
Thank you.
We have an anonymous question that I think we've touched on a little bit, but let me see if anybody has anything they want to say in addition. And it's about how guidelines are set when you first begin working with a rep. We talked about initial contracts, I think, but does anyone want to sort of talk about how expectations are clarified and met between both parties as you go into the relationship? How is that typically handled? And Matt, I love you and I see you nodding your head, but let me defer to Candace and Andrea just for a minute to see if they'd like to speak on this topic first.
Candace?
I can't deep breath. I think you just have to lay it all out and start the discussion going. And it goes back and forth of explanation and questions and setting guidelines that everybody's comfortable with. I think it's all about the communication, and you really have to get that set so there's no surprises and no false promises or anything like that, that it's just real, and most important, honest. Got to always be honest.
I do have something to share without using any names, of course. Reps, we're nice people. Not all reps. You can't just trust reps. I think I make that point clear. The terms of a rep's contract, I have heard some reps charging in ways that will keep you, and you're not able to really end the relationship.
Mhm.
Really read those terms clearly, make sure they're fair for you. Don't just get so excited, I'm going to work with a rep. Really, even take it to a lawyer. Thank
I
you.
was just gonna say the same thing because my experience was when I first started, I did this kind of haphazardly and there was no, kind of almost pride myself on having no contract. Ultimately, what I really concluded was no contract wasn't great for either me or the artists, because really it didn't frame an agreement, it didn't break out those responsibilities. But to Andrea's point, there was and is a contract that was developed years ago by a group of bigger reps at the time, let's say people who were less boutique-y as us. And it was written by lawyers for the reps' advantage. And much like an agency PO is written for the agency's advantage. And it didn't do the photographers any service. In fact, it punished them in a lot of ways. And some of them were, don't even hold up in court, honestly. It was like they wrote it, people signed it. But I learned part of this from watching a friend of mine who got approached by a big rep photographer. He signed it before I was doing any of this. I was still producing at the time. And then when 2 years later, 3 years later, he went to get out of the contract and it cost him a lot of money to leave. And he actually hadn't made that much money. And he had one big client coming in, and the rep, there was nothing else that developed in those 3 years. And not only did he pay his commission on that client, he had to pay double the commission that year when he wanted to leave. Horrible situation. It makes no sense. So what Andrew recommended is, and I would say this for anyone who's signing a contract, you're getting involved in a business relationship. And I think Candace mentioned seeing it as like a marriage, and I've always seen it the same way. Is like, you hope it's going to be a long-term thing. But as the artist, whatever contract you get from a rep, regardless of whoever it comes from, give it to a lawyer, spend $600, let them look it over, let them give the notes, take yourself out of the negotiations, because much like I was saying, how you want to start off with an agency on a good foot on a project, it's the same thing with any of us. I mean, when I have crafted our agency agreement, it's less of a contract and more of a bullet pointed of like who's doing what. And if it were to all end, here's how it goes. And there's no financial severance, it's a time severance, but like it makes a point of not punishing anybody, and making it clear to everybody involved, so that I've really tried to make it fair. I mean, and you guys probably the same way, it's probably to our own detriment, given the idea of like, if you're looking at it from a corporate point of view, but that's not what we do. We work with artists. We see I've been fortunate that most of my artists have been with me for a decade, if not more. They're family. And, it's still a business relationship, but we see them as very valuable people in our lives. And so you want to just make sure the helpful thing about the framework is whenever there is tension, you can go back to it and say, oh no, you said you were going to do this piece of marketing and pay for it. That's not my responsibility. And it's clear. And I think that's helpful because, and vice versa, from the photographer's point of view, they might see something that they feel they're not getting the service that they originally agreed to. And they can point back to that agreement and say, no, this is actually what we agreed upon. And for us to look at it like, oh, you're right. I'm not holding up my end of the bargain. That is really helpful, because I think what happens is if you go into things too casually, there's a lot of assumptions are made or unspoken expectations, and those will fester until someday somebody's annoyed, they didn't get a job on one side or the other, or the rep feels like the photographer didn't give it their all, and then it blows up. And you want to avoid that. going back to the marriage thing. You want it to be a strong communication, strong relationship. You're supporting each other.
Yeah, everybody wants to avoid that. Nobody wants to be involved in that. I agree. So I have to say we're a little over an hour into this, and just to kind of give everybody an idea, I have 5 pages of questions here. We're one page in. So I guess what I'd like to say to the audience is we're gonna keep making our way through this, but I want to urge everyone, if you have questions, put them in the chat now, because your questions are why we're here. So I want to make sure, please, by all means, start putting those in there, and Juliet can break in. And
Yeah.
okay.
So let me just say there's a couple questions. First of all, anything related to copyright, there's also on the YouTube channel on American Photographic Artists, or if you go to the apnational.org, there's conversations that we've had with attorneys about copyright. So you can watch that, and it'll give you a lot of information about registering your copyright, or you can contact us and we can give you some answers in that regard. There is a question about standard rep fees. If they're 25 or 35%, do they consider severance fee a standard practice for a rep photographer relationship? So maybe we can start with that question.
I do. I'm 25% of their fees only, no expenses. And if we break up, I'm covered for 6 months with that 25%. I felt that was just simple, clear, easy.
I would say we're similar. It varies between 25 and 30% depending on going back to what I was saying about how much work we're taking on now. Since we're doing a lot of the bookkeeping, a lot of the processing, it has shifted a bit more toward 30% because our costs have gone up. I don't have too many photographers who are interested in doing their own billing to agencies I simply put that 5% as that cost. My contract is set up, there would be I wouldn't even call it a contract, the agreement is set up. It's the same thing. There's a time severance, it's not financial. You have, depending on how long you're with the agency, it's up to 6 months of where we still get commissioned on projects if you were to decide to leave. And then after that, you're free and clear.
I agree with all of that. So the thing is, I think too, with more of a commission at the 30% versus 25, aside from billing, if you're a new talent that really has not really, done a lot of work and don't have a lot of your own clients, there's a lot of time and effort, more so, that's put into getting you those jobs. So I've even worked it out where it's a higher commission in the beginning, and after a year or 2 years and you're busy all the time, then the commission can go down to 25%. So it's really different with different situations, different circumstances.
And there's a question about the money flow. Does it go through the production companies? Should the photographers do it through their own studios? The question is, who's controlling the flow of money on commercial jobs?
What I've been trying to do is get 2 POs, one for the photographer and their fees, and the other one for the production company. So the production company gets paid the advance, keeps track of everything, gets all the money they need, and the photographer gets the fees when the job is completed. It keeps it clean and simple and less people's hands and everything. That's how I do it.
And that is great. Not every agency, unfortunately, will do that. But what I would say is we've, over the years, advocated to have the billing go through us, mainly because we know, I know that the invoices can go in on time, the advance goes in, and if the producer is looking for money, some photographers are very business oriented, others are not. So it just gives us a little bit more of the control over that. And at the end of the day, when the final payment comes in, we're legally obligated to pay the photographer their fees, but it saves us also if for some reason, if the relationship were ending or changing, you're not chasing somebody, suing them for your percentage of it. Like we by contract, we'll always give them the amount that's owed and are legally obligated to do it. I think that there's also an element going back to what I was saying earlier about agencies trusting people. If an agency or a client has worked with a rep a lot, they trust that the billing is going to be complete. It's going to be honest. There's going to be they know that we review things. And if I'm putting my stamp of approval on something before it goes in, they're less concerned about having to dig deep in looking in to see if there's anything shady going on. And, while I would say most photographers are honest, there are, and this is true of reps as well, not everybody is. And there have definitely been instances over the years, even in the last few years, where we've heard of things where, people are fabricating invoices and it's like when it blows up, it's bad. And the thing for me is, if I let a photographer bill that and that happens and it blows up, it's a reflection on me and I will get punished for it. And that means all my other artists will get punished for it as well. And whereas if the individual, so if I look at it and coming out of production, I'll snuff out something that looks shady before it goes into an agency and can say what's going on here? Why is this here? Let's talk about what are we trying to do here? And that way, I'm just making sure that everything goes in is legit, so that because I'm responsible not only for that one photographer or artist, but for the entire roster and the reputation of my own company.
I'm going to steer this a little bit out of this sort of neighborhood. And Julia, keep coming with the questions if you see them. But I was going to ask, when you sign somebody new, what's the first thing you usually focus on with them? Brandon, talent to you.
Editing. Editing.
Great answer. So you'll see that people come in, they bring you all their work from however many years they've got, and they're like, make a new book, or you're like, we need to change this up. And do you also give them assignments for new work, for new projects?
Well, encourage it. You want to always encourage all the artists to do personal work. And when I say editing, I mean, that's really editing for your website and editing images for a portfolio. But now, except an online portfolio, we're really not going out presenting portfolios in person. But in order to have them be seen in the best light, we really want to hone in on their best work and a clear voice.
That's great.
Yeah, and from having a depth of work, which I think is what Candace was touching on, is important. Also getting a sense of kind of where they're coming from. If somebody's coming in where they haven't been really marketed nationally or haven't made a big push on their own, and I see that their work is I have a connection with their work, that gives me something to say, to be excited about. I mean, part of it, what brings us all here is that we get excited about the work itself. Part of what makes us earnest and what our clients like is when I come to somebody, I'm not, taking a photographer's work through. I'm like, they're okay. Here, hey, check, this is great. It's no, I'm behind it. If I sign somebody, I believe in them. And so seeing that work and knowing that it's there, and then being able to kind of refine that into a presentation that might fit a commercial world, that goes down to the editing point I think that Candace is making, knowing that what's there. And that does, I would say, when you do start working with a rep, or if you're kind of trying something out, is you've got to trust their instincts as well, because I've definitely encountered photographers are creative people with and have opinions and about their work, about other people's work, and they're valid, except that our role is to take that work and position it in a way that will click with what we see going on in a marketplace. And kind of goes back to what I was saying about that, the rep who'd said, oh, the work wasn't sellable, and I was heartbroken about that photographer. He was right. That photographer was never going to click in a commercial world. Doesn't matter that the work was amazing. It just there was no client that was, and I repped somebody at one point who was similar. And to this day, he's one of the most talented people I ever worked with. his work just never really, I mean, every art director and creative director would ooh and ah over it and be like, oh, I wish I could find a project to work with him on. But they knew they could never sell their client on using his work because it was dark and kind of weird, but they loved it. So for us, it's finding that kind of edit. And then when you're working with a rep, of trusting us to make that edit. And often what we'll say is, you keep what you want on your site. We're going to create the edit on our site. You know, we're the more polished, salesy version that people can go to and see, you know, maybe not your nudes or your personal work or things that might distract from what we're trying to market at that moment. But it's not to say that we don't value that other work. It's just that it really, at points, unfortunately, in this current day and age, people have a short attention span, and they can jump on something, and if they see the wrong thing in the wrong light, that's all they view you for.
Andrea, I've got a question for you specifically. Do you have any good stories or examples of how you helped one of your photographers evolve or get past a challenge that they had?
Definitely. And I mean, I see that as I'm the honest voice with the photographer. It's not an easy place to be. I have to see what they can excel at. Let's say they haven't been working for a while. It's my job to get in there, dive in. What do you need to do? What are you good at? Let's take that, have a new idea, do some educational talking, get anything to get some content going and awareness. The other part is more personal. I've been on portfolio showings. A photographer reeked of cigarette smoke. He stunk. And I had to be the one to pull him out of the portfolio showing, say, you got to do something. Go get a toothbrush. You stink. The cigarettes, you got to stop. That kind of thing. I've been in meetings, photographers are clicking pens. I've been on Zoom calls recently where I hear a tapping sound. And I'm texting them going, whatever you're doing, it's your mouse or something. I have to be that kind of annoying person. As we all say, it's a marriage, right?
Yeah. I mean, great, right? I mean, I see you guys are like the gurus of communication and knowing sort of like what the expectations are of the clients and what you want your photographers to be saying on the creative call. So I would imagine, especially in this day and age, you're texting them in the middle of it saying, hey, mention this. Hey, right?
And we will often do, I usually will do a pre-call with a lot of the photographers before we get on the call. I have one photographer in particular who his English is his second language. He's an amazing talent, but he's still, even though he's lived in the US for 20 years, but he still gets a little nervous. So we'll get on and we'll hammer out. He knows what he wants to say, but I help him create notes for the call. So he's got some bullet points that he can go back to. And it was a big turning point in his career, actually, when we started working together. Was he was losing job because his calls weren't going great. And it was simply because it wasn't that he didn't know what he wanted to say, he just was struggling how to say it. And as he's gotten more comfortable doing that now too, he's actually gotten more relaxed about it, and he's become actually even a little more funny, and he's very self-deprecating, and it's done well for his career overall. But it was, to your point about the cigarette smoke, it was one of those things early, because we had just started working together, and I was like, ooh, his calls really aren't good. And it's like, how do you tell somebody that? But he, to his credit, he really wanted that feedback, because I think he knew something wasn't clicking. He wanted somebody to help him, and he really welcomed that support. And the more we've done it together, the better things have gotten. So
I have a question here from Doug Troop, who's another agent. So I'm going to, if he's unmuted now, or he can turn his video on, and I can add him that way.
I think it did. It's open. Can you see me?
Yeah, there you are. Hi, Doug.
Hi, everyone. That's pretty bright. My question is, and I'm sure you all have to deal with this, but selling during COVID for the past 18 months plus, haven't been allowed to go out and do portfolio shows, which I happen to love, and I traveled around the country every month, but that's been taken away. So I'm curious to know how you are dealing with selling your artists during this period. I know that we're all sort of trying to get these Zoom meetings, but from what I understand, creatives are getting Zoomed out. You know, they're working from home. So to have a photographer or rep come, want to come in to present, it's been quite challenging. I know for my group, what we've been doing is we've been putting together case studies of projects that we've worked on during COVID. And that has been very successful because creatives want to know how the photographers are really dealing with work during this period. And so I wanted to hear what you guys, what you're doing. I know that everyone's doing this, trying to do Zoom meetings, and some are more successful than others. We do an awful lot of e-marketing, and I'm sure you all do that as well. But who, if any of you, are meeting people in person to present work?
I could only speak for myself, but like I'm in New York, like you, and yeah, no one's really back in the office, so that's made it difficult. The idea of, I was much like I used to, portfolio reviews for us were kind of the last bastion of really selling. I think there was another question at one point we were discussing in the background about who do you reach out to, art buyers, art producers, and creatives. It used to be that, as I was saying, like creatives used to really love us because we were bringing in things they had never seen before. Now they're overworked, oversaturated, and usually kind of protected by art producers, and generally don't want to, like, they're hard to get in touch with unless you already have an existing relationship, or unless a photographer, and I was going to say for the photographers among all of you, can reach out directly. But that is something you do. If you're doing it, reach out because you've seen their work and you can say to them, and I think this would be one of the number one tenets to me of selling as a photographer is do your research. Find people who do work you like and say you. So when you reach out to them, you can say, I've seen this campaign that you did and I love it. And I think, once you build that connection, usually, especially right now, because everyone's been trapped at home, you'll find people who will probably open that email. It's actually become harder for us as salespeople and reps, I think, to break through that clutter because we're more that like mass marketing, like, as earnest as we can be. It's less likely the creative director is going to be like, oh, you're a really cool thing you just told me about. It's like, yeah, sure, whatever. The Zoom meetings, yes, I think that they're all zoomed out, particularly creatives. What I was, one of the things I know from speaking to creative directors that I'm friends with is that they used to love being at an agency because if there was a 2 to 3 p.m. meeting with a client, they were told to show up at 2:40 and they'd have to stay at 2:50 to do their part. They could come in at 2:40 and leave at 2:50. Now they're stuck on a Zoom from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock because that's what gets put on their calendar. And so they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs. Whereas in an actual agency, and this is for anyone who's ever been inside of an advertising agency, this is real. They would probably bounce off to a ping pong table with another art director for the first half hour, waiting to go into that meeting. Maybe they're brainstorming another campaign, whatever, before they had to go sit for the 10 minutes they really needed to be there. Now they're stuck for an hour and then they move on right to the next meeting. So they're zoomed out. The idea of getting them on another Zoom presentation is really difficult to sell them. Hopefully, as the world evolves and things develop, we're going to get better. The world's been flipped upside down. And I think that in the long run, this could change things in a good way for us as well, in that people have no longer had that inundation that they once had when they were in their offices. I mean, it's funny because like it used to be that we used to do direct mail, and direct mail was a very effective form of promotion. And then as agencies started putting people in these open office plans and no one actually had desks anymore and they had tiny little mailboxes, it became harder and harder to do that. When they go back, there is no direct mail anymore because no one knows where to send anything. Unless you can get someone's home address, there's no point of sending direct mail to an agency at this point, because it's just going to a mailbox that will eventually get thrown out in 3 days.
On that note, that brings me to my next question. I was going to ask each of you what your marketing superpower is, especially today. Like, let's talk about what is working today. Andrea?
I see this as a bigger question. I see marketing. I had my own webinar with APA last week, and I showed my pyramid. I made this pyramid, and it has levels to marketing, and it's everything. It's not just doing one thing, but in my opinion, you have to master one thing, at least one thing. I've seen photographers have success off mastering, being great at one part of marketing, and it could be anything.
Can you share that? That was so awesome. I watched that.
How do I?
Yeah, well, you can put it in you could share it on the share screen now. Also, it'll be on the American Photographic Artists YouTube channel, so you can watch it there.
But yeah, that pyramid.
It'll be on Ask Stern Rep on my website soon.
Okay.
But I have it in front of me, so I'm staring at it. But it has about 20 different items, and you have to the whole theory for me on marketing is you have a marketing plan. It's not being good at one thing. You have to have a plan. You have to know what you're good at, what you're doing, and what you're not doing.
You should be able to share your screen if you wanted.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
A visual. The green button on the bottom.
Green button.
Share screen.
Share screen. Oh, is that? No. Okay, share. There it is. Can you see it?
All right.
But we see your whole desktop. So
okay, good.
We're seeing things you might not want us to see.
That's okay.
So expand it. Make it green. So push the green button on top of the visual so it covers your whole page. Top left of that. Yeah.
This one?
No, go all the way left. There's 3 little dots. One should be green. No, it's probably not that kind of.
She doesn't care.
Okay.
I really don't care.
All right. Okay. Go ahead.
So
Go ahead. Share away.
This is my pyramid, and it's really based on, you can mix these up, but these are all the different pieces, the tools of marketing. And you can do 5 of them, but you just have to know the other 10 I'm not doing. So what do? I get help. I delegate. I figure it out. I ask someone. I research. Like, you have to have a plan and know what your plan is. It's going to be your plan. This is how I see it. I put testing on top because in my opinion, that's number 1 for marketing, because that's your direction. You have to keep exploring, expanding, growing, and testing to see where you're going to take your career, which is a big part of our industry. Is where is it going? What's it going? Because it's moving quickly. I've seen photographers, fantastic. They do great for 5 years and then they're out because they didn't do any marketing. They didn't grow. You have to stay with it. So this is my pyramid.
And then I would add to the point on testing too, is one of the things that I think is how we would be testing from a rep's point of view and a photographer's point of view is a photographer will be like, oh, I have this cool idea and I'm going to go out and test. You have to be strategic in it. And I think that's to the point Andrea is probably making. It's like, it's not just testing. It's like, okay, I want to shoot for Honda, or I want to shoot for Prada. You need to look at the work they're doing, and if those, and set goals. If those are the clients you want, you test towards their work. I remember it used to be years ago, there were a lot of photographers who always wanted to shoot for Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair had, and it was the pinnacle of like every photographer assistant friend I had, they all wanted to, you know, have their work running Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair had a very specific look and feel. And the thing is if you wanted to work in Vanity Fair, you had to shoot work that fit their style. It wasn't going to go the other way around. Going in with a book of pictures that didn't fit their style, they'd take the meeting, but you're not going to get in Vanity Fair. So it's like, if that's your goal, start to tailor your work or give them a presentation that shows you can do what they want. And you might be able to get ahead of the curve and show them something cooler, which is even better, but ultimately you have to be in their universe. If you go in with something that's totally outside of what they're doing, chances are that's not going to get you where you want to go. And, you know, marketing was, not to keep going back to what it was versus what it is now, but I'm going to do it again. It wasn't that long ago, there were only a few avenues for it. You know, you had your direct mail, there was email marketing, and then you might be able to take out ads and say Lurser's Archive, Ad Edge, places like that. Now it's, there's 30 different options, if not more. And I'm not kidding when I've asked creative directors, art producers, where they find people. If I ask 10 people, you might get 10 different answers. And so to Andrea's point of the pyramid, you kind of have to figure out a way of covering that. And you may not cover everything great, but at least understand that those are areas where you do need to look at those different aspects and cover yourself for it. I would say some of the things, social media is something that even in the moment becomes a little bit more of a flash in the pan. You know, what was the hot social media 2 years ago is always not the same thing the next 2 years. Instagram was hot, it still is. It's obviously a natural outlet for photographers because it's all image based. From my own personal experience, I've seen a little bit of a decline, even pre-COVID, of clients saying, we're going to hire this person off of Instagram, because sometimes they had great success and they were hiring them mainly for the followers. Other times they ran into the situation we were talking about earlier, where they hired somebody who had a great image, but did not have the skill set to replicate it or produce a large campaign within a day.
So what would you say is your superpower, your marketing superpower, Matt?
My marketing superpower. Oh, wow. First and foremost, I lean on my artists. I think it's them, it's their personalities, because that's ultimately what I'm trying to market. I push on them, especially when they've got great stories. That's it. That's what people, and going back to Instagram, we are all so inundated with imagery around us day in, day out, that it's really hard to make anything memorable. And it's hard to say that to photographers and somebody who is passionate about photography, that a memorable image is far less memorable than it used to be. It's the stories ultimately for us that I think resonate with people. And that goes, Doug was talking about the portfolio reviews, and that's actually, to me, was the biggest benefit of a portfolio review, was not just showing the images, but actually sharing the stories around those images. And we used to get calls that would be based on a story. An art director wouldn't remember the photographer, they wouldn't necessarily remember the image, they would remember the story, and they would tell it to the art producer, who would call me and say, okay, this person just mentioned this story. And so leveraging the photographers and their stories and their experiences is probably the superpower that I would say I have, and figuring out the best way to do that.
That's a great answer. Candace, how about you? What's your superpower?
Communication. Just being who I am and in love with all the people that are part of my family and getting the word out and being real. I think my superpower is being real and honest and being a storyteller, whether it's personally about my artists, about funny stories, about successes of my family that people have been watching, all kinds of things. It's that personal touch that people will want to hear from me or want to call me. Just being me, which I don't always love every day, but I try to. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think you got good at that? Were you born with that natural talent? Yeah. Can you teach it?
Pardon?
Can you teach it? Can you teach it to your photographers?
Yes and no. My skill set is sales, only because of my gift of loving communication with people. Not all photographers like that. They're shy, or they're inhibited, or they're uncomfortable. I think everybody comes with their own skill set. That's why it's teams and it's marriages and it's putting the right groups together, and it comes down to trust and honesty and believing in each other. And that's key.
One thing I will add is something Candace said earlier, which is finding your voice. And as a rep, that's something we help do. And that, I think, is something that you can kind of quote unquote teach, because we're looking at a broad piece of work and saying, okay, this is what you've got that is cohesive, or will speak to somebody and help them learn to speak about that. And that kind of comes down to, as much as we're all in a creative industry, that's like sales 101 of, like the old elevator speech. What do you do? What is it you're passionate about? What does it make you different than somebody else? That voice is exactly that. And actually it goes back to Candace's editing comment too. It's like all that comes down to helping somebody hone down into figuring out what is it that if you met a creative director or an art producer and they asked what you did, have an answer. Be prepared to answer. What is it that if you say I shoot everything, that's not good. Just because it's not going to really tell them what you do. Find a very clear, concise, whether it's 2-3 sentences of just of like what you're passionate about, what you think you do, and that automatically starts a conversation.
And confidence. Try and give your artists confidence to believe in themselves and encourage them like you do your children, like you do your partner, how great they are, and point that out to them, that they are great. It's very important. I learned that at an early age.
Yeah, the encouragement's important.
Yes.
Ken, were you going to say something?
I was going to ask another question in terms of finding work for your photographers. I'm sure all three of you have established relationships with many, many clients. Are you, especially like recently, are you finding that you're mostly procuring new work through clients you already have a relationship with, or how are you going about finding clients that maybe you've never worked with before? What efforts do you make to find those clients, and what's kind of the ratio between, the world just seems so big now because of all things being digital, but relationships are still important. So are you finding that most of the work that's coming into your agency is through established relationships? Or are you always looking to find new relationships, and how are you doing that?
It's really all of the above. It's both. It really is both. And I think it comes down to research. I think it comes down to exposure. I think, having your talent. I have my talent give me their wish list. What do you want to work with? Okay, so if I'm going to find contacts to show your work for that particular client, what do you have that's going to back that up, that's going to make them interested in you? And even though the editorial world is shrinking and there's not that much money to be made, that's great exposure if you can have the magazines hire you. So it's really all of the above, and staying in contact with existing clients, telling them about something new and showing them what you have and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I would say, especially in the last, since COVID, it had started pre-COVID, but definitely post-COVID, a flight towards experience. Clients were going back to people they knew, especially when they weren't able to send people on shoots and they were doing things remotely. We found quickly that they would quickly go with somebody they'd either worked with in the past or knew that had worked a lot in the past. They were much more risk averse. They weren't going with young photographer. The Instagram photographer was like, okay, I've seen you've done this shoot 20 times before. I'm going to send you out to do it, which was good for our standpoint because we often had those relationships, or people would call us at least to lean on us for those relationships. I think that will still come to play as we move forward, I think people are looking at experience and wanting to know that things are going to get delivered and trust in that it's there, and that whoever is going out to deliver will be able to bring everything back as noted. I mean, it almost go back, like the initial days of COVID were like the old film days of you send somebody out and you didn't know what you're actually going to get till the day after. Not completely, but it was much more of that. It was much more uncomfortable for clients and agencies. So they went back towards leaning to people they trusted. And I, from the idea of a rep, one of my photographers he's always described it as, on his own, he doesn't, the way the world has changed, he doesn't have a seat at the table. That, the way agencies often work is they start by going through representation agencies first before they look back at individual photographers, which is kind of the natural course of the way things have worked. And by being part of an agency, it helps him get a seat at the table. And I would say that to some degree is true. It's not to say that an individual photographer can't break through and get their own work, but especially in the larger major agencies and major clients, they start with a broader group of, basically we're the feeder. They come to us and say, who do you have? And we put forth people that we think are right for the job. And it kind of helps them cull the herd without having to do as much research, because they don't have the time anymore. Everybody's more pressed for time. I think is probably the simplest way of saying it.
How do all of you, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but how are all three of you dealing with this world of treatments now? Or can you, I know that's a whole thing. We're sort of coming to the end here, but is there a way to maybe speak about that concisely before we wrap up the evening?
I think I should answer the last question. I'll just throw this in there before treatments. I am noticing a lot of people finding me through my branding. I'm doing a lot of social media. To me, that was one of the highest on my pyramid, is to do as much social media, because it's my branding, which if people can find us, I'm going to hear about these jobs. I get a lot of emails from production companies and producers and client direct. Do you have anyone who could this, as Candace saying, that's happening a lot. So we have to keep our companies out there in front of people. And there's two parts to that, because I have to keep my social media blossoming and going thoroughly every day, but it has to have the right audience. So I have to research who are the right clients, and I have to engage with them and follow them, and hopefully they'll follow me back. So it is a process. It's a process, but keeping yourself out there and your brand very strong. To answer your last question.
Thank you.
So I'll jump in on the treatment front. So treatments are something that's been very common in the film world for a long time. Not to date myself, but I was saying my first job was in TV commercial production, and that was one of my first roles, was helping the director build the treatment. Was literally at that point was cutting out photocopies and pasting them up and like creating the actual physical treatment that would go into an agency. It was not something that was ever brought into still photography, rarely. Probably the first time is really about 10 years ago that I got asked for it. And it was on a major rebrand campaign where it was, an iconic client that was doing something totally different, that I think they spoke to 30 different photographers at points, and they really wanted their point of view on 5. So they asked them for a treatment. That started, and then all of a sudden became this thing where it became on every job. And part of it ultimately is, I think it's been a buyer's market, so it's harder for us to say no. Somebody asks for a treatment, well, you want to be competitive. You want to give yourself, your photographer, the best shot. And the thing is that they vary wildly, and that's the other thing, is we don't have a standard of what a treatment is, because sometimes, and this actually is true in TV commercials too, one of the most famous TV commercial directors that's ever been, we shot alongside of his commercial, and the agency sent me a treatment, and it was literally a Word doc that was 2 paragraphs long. but no pictures, no visuals, but he was a really famous TV director. So it was like, here's what I'm going to do. And they went with it. We're given the opportunity to present it. And I found that it's all over the place. You know, you can spend they take a lot of time. And I can say as a rep, I get involved because we want to present the vision as best we possibly can. But it's also very frustrating because you can spend all that time and if you don't get the job, all those hours are wasted. And the film industry has a little bit more of an ability to recoup that in the sense that they see it as the number of jobs they're bidding. Eventually it's kind of covered off in the markup, and that they've got kind of a way of, and a lot of the larger film production companies actually have people on staff who help the directors build those treatments. Where once again, we don't have that. It's on the photographer and us to kind of deal with that. And, you know, sometimes you go on a job and you'll know that another photographer submits a 1-page treatment and one of my photographers submitted a 10-page treatment and you still don't get the job. You don't know. Or you get the ridiculous requests of asking for a treatment on a product shot on white on a product that already exists. It's like, what are you going to say? And make your product look good. It's kind of pointless. But we ultimately have to decide, I guess it's up to each individual photographer on whether they want to do it or not. There are some experienced photographers or some well-known photographers that I've talked with, not on my roster, but who have basically, one in particular, he's just drawn a line in the sand. He said he got tired of it. He said he'll only do a treatment if he's told he's the creative director's choice going in. Otherwise, he feels like he's wasting his time. And if he's not the creative director's choice, he'll happily give him a treatment after he's awarded the job. He's of a stature that he can kind of do that and, you know, pull that off. Most of us are not, but it is I would say it's gotten to be a bit of here's a good story, like not in this market, but one of my photographer I repped in Germany, or I repped here, but he was a German photographer, was bidding on a project and he thought he was bidding against 3 people, and he submitted his estimate and his treatment and called the client and they said, oh, we're waiting on the other 4 estimates and treatment, or other 5 estimates and treatments. And he's like, 5 estimates and treatments? I thought this is a triple bid. They're like, oh, no. The agency really wanted a broad range on this. And he had been close with the creative director, so he basically thought this was his job. And he was dealing with the procurement person at the client, which in Europe, it's a car client, and the billing goes through the client directly and the agency is the creative. And she said, yeah, he said something about this being a lot of work. She's like, yeah, you guys should really push back and not do these. And he's like, but you guys asked for them. Like, this is not like, I didn't volunteer to do this. And he's like, if I don't do it and the other 4 people did. And she's like, yeah. And he's like, she's like, you guys really should have a union. He's like, we do. And in Germany, there really is a photographers union. But his point was like, it's really on you guys keep asking for these things. Of course, we're going to do it because it's a competitive market. And ultimately, he didn't get the job. And, he was blindsided because he thought it was a triple bid. And then he thought it was like 5 photographers bidding for it. They asked for a treatment. They asked for all. And so it's difficult. You have to kind of try to gauge whether, and I think the positive aspect, or looking at it in a way of trying to gauge, one of the things that I try to do now is ask the agency, who is the treatment being written for? Is it being written for the creatives, or is it being written for the client? Because if it's being written for the creatives, you have to probably invest more time and more energy in trying to sell your vision. If it's being written for the client, it's really putting together a deck of your work that says, here's what I do, and here's what I'm going to do for you. And it requires less time. Getting that answer up front can usually help understand how much time you need to invest into it.
I think sometimes you can just provide imagery that speaks to the job and not have to go into a whole treatment.
Go ahead, Candace.
No, that's just another alternative. It depends. As long as you could show imagery that speaks to what they want to do and what they're looking for, that's a good way to present yourself as well.
I always have photographers do treatments. I feel it's important. And I just need to say, we did a great webinar, my APA webinar. I forget what number it is, Mary Dale of Big Leo Productions. And we also had a treatment writer. So Mary's a rep and a writer, and we talked all about treatments. It's a great webinar. It's on Ask Stern Reps YouTube and also APA's YouTube. Really worth checking that out.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
We have a sample, we go through it. Yeah.
Great.
All right, guys, we have almost made it to 2 hours, so we got to wrap this up. We had a question came in that I think you guys are going to really like. Claudia Boast asked, who's encouraging them as agents? Like, how do they avoid burnout when they are constantly having to give and take care of so many artist needs and everything that comes with a production? Who would like to answer that? Candace, would you like to answer that?
That's a great question.
Isn't that good?
Wow. Just loving what you do and being able to take rejection, just moving forward and saying, okay, moving on. What's next? That's all you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have the same. Yeah. Go, Matt.
Go ahead, Andrea. No, you be first.
I have the same theory. I love what I do, and I've expanded it to this Ask Stern Rep just because I love doing it. And I was doing it anyway, individually with photographers on emails. I was like, I got to do this. I'm doing it. So I'm going to answer all these questions. It's taken off my Ask Stern Rep, and it's such a joy for me. It feeds me. So that is how I'm being myself, put myself out there.
Nice.
Beautiful.
I would say, the COVID was very difficult to start with because, going back to the idea of what we are as reps, unfortunately, and we're also often called upon to be therapists. And I know that early on for the first 6 months, 8 months, actually it's continued on, but everybody was calling and saying, what's going on? What's going to happen? And I'm like, well, if I honestly knew what was going to happen, I could tell you and we'd all be richer for it, but I didn't know because no one knew. The world was, upside down. And I had photographers, and I totally empathize with this because it's how I am. They just wanted to be out taking pictures. It wasn't even necessarily a matter of being paid for it. They wanted to do something, and they were trapped in their houses. And they just wanted an answer. And it was difficult because I couldn't give them the answer they wanted. I could give them the answer I knew, which is my job, but I wasn't giving them the answer they wanted, which was difficult, and it caused some tension for a while. And that took going back to your question about how we dealt with it, having other reps, I touched on earlier about a photographer who talked about being an island. He founded a group in New York of very successful photographers that was essentially like a support group. They met once a month, and they would kind of talk about situations they went through that they dealt with as photographers on a high level that they didn't feel comfortable sharing with other people. I had rep friends that I could reach out to and be like, oh my God, this is what's going on. And it helped give me perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for photographers as well, is finding people who do what you do, learning to trust them, and forming a peer group where you can share those experiences that you can bounce. I mean, this is true of a lot of aspects of life where you hear because more often than not, everybody's kind of going through the same thing, or we'll have some similar experience. And once you hear it and can kind of talk about it, it gives you perspective around the situation you're in the moment, and helps you kind of figure out a better solution than if you were just on your own.
Yeah, that's why we have a photo association like American Photographic Artists, so that people can come together and talk about it. And we can invite you here today and I really appreciate all of you being here today. It means a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Andrea, Candace, Matt, Ken,
Ew.
Juliet, thank you all so much. We really appreciate coming together. We might have to do another round of this in a couple of months because we have a lot of questions we didn't get to, but thank you all. And I agree. Let's be a community. Everybody reach out, find your accountability partners and your therapy amongst your fellow photographers and agents. I think it's so important. Thanks, guys. Have a great
Thanks for
evening.
having
Thank
us.
you.